I always frame it in the sense of everybody has their own story, right? Everybody has their own history. So as I'm learning about somebody and I'm having this conversation with them, especially during that first or second therapy session, I'm always reminding like, I'm here to learn about your story. And part of that story, a huge part of that story is learning about where you're coming from in order to dispel any biases that may be out there. And let's put it out in the therapy room. Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arnaud, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
All right. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Dave. We're right in the thick of winter and it's cold, it's gloomy, but here we are.
Hey, happy Friday.
Happy Friday. So glad it's Friday.
So it's just us today. We're going to chat about culture. And we've been behind the scenes kind of discussing this for a while. I think it's something that we both really consider as we're doing our work. And so we'll see. This can go in a whole bunch of different directions. But, talking about cultural competence or cultural humility, those might be new words for a lot of the listeners. But in the mental health field, like there is this real emphasis on understanding, our own culture and cultures of others and looking at like how that shows up in the therapy room. So, it's always in the room, whether we recognize it or not, and whether
Yeah.
we're naming it or not. Yeah. So I think we're gonna name some of it today and have a chat about it. And I'm curious kind of where you're at with it. And I would just have like a casual conversation that we would probably have off air, on air. So
I think it'll be an interesting conversation because there's so much to talk about when it comes to culture. And even as you were talking about that, Dave, I'm thinking the conceptualization of today's episode. And I think there's so much to talk about. It'll probably end up being a two-parter where we will release one episode and then follow up with a second episode right after that. Taking a look at it from a broad sense of culture, I think many of us, including the listeners, have their definition of culture. But I'm really hoping that today we can expand this idea of culture and hopefully explain and describe how culture is more than just, for example, multiculturalism or ethnic differences, and that culture is all around us, even, from the big picture of society into that funnel where within our own families, we may have a certain culture. So I think we're probably going to go from like a broad discussion and then we'll narrow it down as we go along.
yeah, I think kind of setting the stage too. I'll the definition that I like that I've found that has been helpful for me to understand culture, it's like it provides us a set of shared values and meaning that its members use to interpret their lives and coordinate social interactions. So these are like unspoken rules and that we kind of pick up by watching others around us as we're growing up, right? And so it does help us kind of navigate social situations and live together and work together. And I think the easiest way to kind of be aware of some of these unspoken or even these inherent biases that we're not aware of is to travel and to go to new places and talk to people from various different cultures. It really kind of like, oh geez, I assumed everyone did this, right? No, not everyone does this. So
Yeah. As you talked about traveling, right? It's a pretty privileged position to be able to do that, right? But even in our own backyard, I think there's a lot of culture to be seen. And I will extend the definition of culture. It's having the contextual values and norms and languages and traditions that people and society may practice, right? And it's so important to understand, where people come from. I think having that open-mindedness to understand, why someone or some group may act a certain way before judging and before saying, oh, that's wrong. Right. And I think many of us will jump to certain conclusions sometimes when we're in public and we'll think something is quote unquote weird when we don't understand where others are coming from. And I think before we started recording, we were saying like this can be a very divisive topic, given that the world we live in nowadays. So let's see where this goes.
Yeah, it could be polarizing. And yeah, I think part of the part B of the definition that I like is that, you know, the problem with cultural conventions is that it, by definition, like restricts certain behaviors, or it ultimately like creates potential oppression. Like it creates categories in our mind, whether we know them or not, about like good and bad, right? And so we can
Yep.
watch someone do something and be like, that's bad or that's wrong. But those are just like cultural conventions. Those aren't rules that we all get the same kind of owner's manual to live our life. These are things that we've picked up, and it can look bad or look good depending on, your own kind of cultural experience. And going back to one more point about, you were saying like cross cultural, like there's Gottman, one of the marriage therapy researchers and clinicians. In one of his books, he talks about like any two people getting together is a cross cultural experience. So even if you're from the same like ethnic background, you're from the same community, you go to the same church or the same school, like you have
Yeah.
all of these shared kind of like on the surface cultural experiences. It's still cross cultural. Like you come from a different family that might have different values or might prioritize things differently.
I think that's why in the therapy room, I always like to frame it with people as I'm learning about them. I always frame it in the sense of everybody has their own story, right? Everybody has their own history. So as I'm learning about somebody and I'm having this conversation with them, especially during that first or second therapy session, I'm always reminding like, I'm here to learn about your story. And part of that story, a huge part of that story is learning about where you're coming from, family values, perhaps, cultural values that you grew up with, in order to, again, dispel any biases that may be out there. And let's put it out in the therapy room so that I know where you're coming from. And I think it really helps, like when we take that approach, when I take that approach anyway, it really helps me guide even interventions. And that's why, like, when people come and they say, oh, what approach are you going to take? Honestly, to this day, sometimes that is like the most challenging question that I have to answer because I know people are looking for a very specific answer. Like, oh, I'm gonna put you like through a 12-week CBT program, and then you're gonna come out shining and brand new and ready to take on the world. But I can't say that, right? Because I don't really even know you right now, right? Or if I'm doing a 15-minute consult call, I don't know you that much right now. So I can tell you a potential approach that I like to take, but because I don't know you and I don't know your story, I can't promise you that that's the road we're going to take. Maybe that, I don't know, that makes maybe listeners, say, "Oh, what is he talking about? Like what a bad clinician is he?"
No, no, I think you're touching on cultural humility, right? And you need to understand people before you start, giving them ideas or recommendations or advice on what to do. So I think that's a big part of it. And not assuming that you know everything about someone, even if they come from a certain background or they identify a certain way, right? And so maybe even just stepping back a little bit, like I know in a lot of our training, cultural competence, and this was not around in the 50s and the 60s. Like this is more recent because there's more recognition that even our own cultural background is going to impact like how we do this work, and we're not this blank slate, we're not this expert, right? So let's walk people through cultural competence a little bit here. I mean, the core elements of cultural competence is self awareness. So, understanding your own cultural values and beliefs and background, and then knowledge, and that's typically knowledge of other cultural groups. So, however that's defined. So, I mean, for example, we could say working with Indigenous clients or working with Black clients or BIPOC clients or LGBTQ. So there's different kind of groupings that will be kind of identified as like, well, you need specialized knowledge to understand this group of people, right?
Hmm.
And then you need the skill to be able to apply like therapy techniques, like you said, different approaches that are going to be culturally appropriate and relevant to the group that you're serving, right? And
That's
if you're
right.
doing that well, then you're considered to be culturally competent with a certain group of people. Tell me if I'm getting this right or
Yeah, yeah,
wrong.
yeah. No, and as you're talking about that too, I think if we even rewind a little bit more, there's a big, for me anyway, and when I supervise new clinicians, there's a big piece just around being kind. Right? Like if we go to the foundation of a lot of this, it's like when you meet someone for the first time, right? Are we already drawing judgment? Are we being kind? you know, if you meet someone from another culture, another race, ethnicity, do you treat them any differently than you would your own? Right? Will you shake that person's hand regardless? Will you say hi, smile, and welcome them into the therapy room? And, for all psychologists and therapists out there, I hope so. But again, we all come from a different story and we may have our own biases that may not guide us in that direction.
For sure. Like we know from research, we all have implicit biases. So as much as you're consciously, trying to be kind, we know that people like before their brain can even put words to what they're thinking, we have reactions to people, often people that are different than us, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of hardwired to be more comfortable with people that either look like us or sound like us. And so the more different someone might be, the more naturally kind of like a negative response, especially when there's like scarcity, especially when there's, not enough to go around, that can really kind of like emphasize this like us versus them, or highlight the differences more than the similarities.
So you want to go down that road right now?
Ah, you started it. You're like, let's be nice to everyone. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good goal. And I try to do that myself. But like knowing that the way our biology works and the way, yeah, like it's like these are subtle little things that we might not be aware of. And so I think this is why we're talking about it, is like at least to create some awareness around this, and don't assume that we're gonna be non-biased, that we're gonna
Yep.
be, culturally competent with everyone, even if we've learned it in our brain as like sitting down in a classroom or going to a workshop. There's things happening below the surface. So yeah, I'm going down there.
We'll definitely keep going down that path. But as you were saying that, Dave, and going back to what I said previously about kindness, like even my bias is showing there. And I just wanted to point this out, the whole shaking hand piece, right? If someone comes, yes, in our culture, when we meet someone for the first time, the formal thing to do is to shake hands, right? But here's case in point. If somebody doesn't shake your hand, right? If they pull back, are you going to take offense to that? Or back to some of our mentalization discussions, will you be curious, right? And more so, will you still be kind about it? Or will you be insulted and offended so much so that now you're like, okay, I got to work with this person, and this is what happened when we first meet. This is not off to a good start. Is there going to be that judgment right off the bat, right? Or can you still be kind and say, "Oh, you know what? Come on in," and still treat them as a client?
Well, I think this goes back to that definition of like culture, that's how we make meaning of things, right?
Yep.
So if someone doesn't shake your hand, are they rude? Are they disrespectful? Are they like, there's a lot of meaning and interpretations and assumptions that come from behavior. And that's why like cross-cultural work, the more different people are, the messier it is, because we actually need to renegotiate and refigure out and be curious about things that if you're meeting with someone from your closer to your background, those are givens. Those aren't negotiated. It's like when we meet, we shake hands. That's what everyone does, right? Like, and there's like things like eye contact. There's a whole bunch of things that we interpret like, is someone lying because they're not looking at us, right? Or what interpretations do we make? And I think if we can get curious about our own interpretations and then ask questions and have people explain, from their perspective, we are going to be more culturally appropriate or like kinder to the people we're meeting with.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I could go down two different paths right now, but I'll choose the one that you previously walked on. I mean, going back to this idea of divisiveness, right? Like again, off air, we were talking about how divisive, at least the media right now, portrays the world to be, and it's very much so. And, scarcity, for example, the message that there's not enough for everybody, that things are being taken away by others. And, that's how the narrative is being portrayed. It instills this idea of fear. And, you pick up on the nuances of what's different about this other group versus us. And it's really easy to pick apart, that if a person is of a different skin tone or, speak a different language, that makes them immediately not one of us, right? And therefore they shouldn't be here or they shouldn't be taking our jobs. And it's such an interesting message because when we were talking, like for me, it's like maybe it's our personalities. We're constantly seeking opportunities and, seeing how we can be creative in our roles. For example, having this podcast and stuff like that. Why not go down the road of thinking outside the box and saying, hey, there's enough for everyone. We just have to keep creating. We just have to get creative and think outside the box. But instead, whatever people's agenda is right now, let's divide.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this off air a bit. Like, the more controversial we might be, the more kind of likes or attention we might get to this podcast, but that's not what we're going for, right? So, I think, media that uses they get paid by advertising, and the more people that are watching are watching for longer, or even like Facebook or Instagram, like these platforms actually, almost take advantage of our hardwiring to, polarize, especially when we're feeling scared, right? And so if they can fear monger or create this like scarcity all of a sudden, yeah, it gets pretty nasty. And I think, oh man, we could look at history like slavery, right? Where we can dehumanize other humans, right? We can create these divisions about skin color or, where they live on the planet. And, we are this way and they are that way. And then it allows us to do certain things or we're not trying to be controversial. This is like real life things that have
It
happened, like
is.
in Nazi Germany, right? Like, how do people actually get put into concentration camps? Well, you start to make divisions between people and it becomes us and them. And then when they're no longer human, we can do some pretty terrible things to other people. So
Yep.
that's what actually worries me about kind of the state of the world right now, is that there seems to be more and more polarization, more and more division between people, and we're looking for the differences rather than the commonalities. And it's kind of scary where that can lead.
And it's not even, for me, it's not even looking for, it's part of it is looking for commonalities, but it's like understanding, right? Step inside someone else's shoes and see it from their lens, from their perspective, and just have an understanding. It's not saying that you have to agree with others, but can we step in their shoes and see where they're coming from and then just leave it alone for a while, right? Just leave it alone. It's sort of like road rage, right? Like you get one driver yelling at another driver, brake checking other people. Like it's dangerous stuff. But how do you know that driver who might be speeding, who might be driving, weaving in and out of traffic, that they're not off to an emergency? Yes, maybe it's still very dangerous, and you could argue, well, they're going to just get into another accident. But before we go off on someone and take a golf club to their car or whatever, like, can we just again be curious and just say, but like, what's going on? Right? Why are you driving like this? And just take it from there instead of, escalating things.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're deviating too far, Dave.
Yeah, I kind of want to bring us back because you know what, the image that comes up for me and doing like even my PhD research and looking at like homelessness and immigrant population, right? Refugees and immigrants coming to Canada. Again, like we can walk by someone who's on the street and go, they made bad choices, right? They put themselves in that situation. I don't have to put myself in their shoes because I'm not like them. Right. And so I get it what you're saying about like putting yourself in someone else's position and trying to empathize with them. But I think if we create these, cognitive, like these separations in our mind where there's different groups of people and we don't actually relate to them anymore because they are different, then we can allow really kind of like cruel and horrible things to happen to certain people because we don't see us even being the same as them.
And that's where the commonality comes in. I think this is where, you know, conversations about different groups, and you and Nathan talked about it in our last episode. The cool thing about your group is that you have people coming from various backgrounds. And, I don't know if they're forced to sit next to each other because there's no more seats or whatever, but, the fact that there's this structure to say, hey, you choose a seat. Whoever's going to be beside you is beside you, and you may have some breakout groups, and you know, this is who you're with today. You have that conversation and you find out that, hey, they are human just like me. They are here just like me, right? So let's treat each other with respect and let's find out more about one another, right? The
Yeah.
power of conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not easy. Like I think even what happens in the group, the men's group, right? That is not something that just happens naturally, that comes easily. I think it's more easy. It's easier to, like, our brain is better at creating categories than it is
Yes.
to, challenge those categories. So I think about my
Well,
kids growing up and they just, the shows that they were watching, where they put the colors together, they're learning the difference in colors, the shapes,
yep,
and those are the building blocks of making sense of the world. Right.
yep,
And so,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think the developing brain, that's how well, cognitively, we would say that if a child can categorize, they are developing as they should be, right?
Hmm.
Even nowadays, my kids might talk about a certain classmate in class, and we're like, oh, who's that? We've never heard of them before. And sometimes, on occasion, their first answer is like, oh, it's that student with the tanned skin, right?
Hmm.
Or the
Hmm.
brown skin. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, so their brain just goes there because it's easier to spot differences.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, what associations come with those differences get learned a little bit later, right? They recognize that there's something different about this other person, but they might not think, oh, that person's bad or good because of their skin color. But later on, we can start to piece this together, right? Some people are better than other people, or even just, in the media, who's in these positions of power, right? Like who is the president, or who is the, maybe not so much right now, but yeah, like who you, like this. Yeah, there's so many layers to this. I'm getting lost in it. I was going to say something about like affirmative action. And for those that don't know that term, it's like, we're changing the standards of admission to university programs based on people's background. And
Yeah,
other people would say, well, that's not fair. That's not like meritocracy. Like those who work harder get better grades should be the ones getting in, regardless
yeah,
of skin color or ethnic background. And it's
yeah,
like, on one level, yes. On another level, like on a bigger societal level, if nobody from a certain background gets into a certain program, it doesn't even seem possible for kids growing up to actually even assume that they would be able to be in those positions, right? So
yeah.
having visual representation, seeing someone look like you in a position allows you to make it more likely that you will end up there too. And so
Yep.
assuming that like these these differences are not as based on merit as we like to think they are. At least that's my view on this.
And look, I think even in our conversation right now, maybe listeners are catching up on this, but like even we have our own views of what culture is, right? We have our own views of people, and you might get another psychologist who's like, these two guys are talking crazy here. Like, why are they so inclusive and whatnot? But I would hope that in our role, this is what we do. But that's my bias, right? That's our biases here.
It is, but it's our professional bias too, right? Like
Yes.
we adhere to code of ethics and professional standards that really does promote like non-discrimination and inclusion and
Yep.
equity. So these are
Yep.
not just our own personal. I think we've stayed with our colleges because they actually fit with our personal too, right? It doesn't create this moral dilemma between us.
Yep.
We can agree that like, yeah, I think this is helpful or this is the way to kind of do therapy. But yeah, there's going to be different views on this for sure.
Well, even as you're saying that, and I'm not going to name names, but there's a big psychologist out of Toronto,
Jordan
right?
Peterson. Ah,
You name names. You did it.
let's do it. This is our conversation. This is what we would be talking about if we weren't even on air, right?
Right.
Like
I wasn't even
this.
planning
Yeah,
going down that road,
I
but
know.
now
I know.
that
Here we
you
are.
you know here we are, and yeah, I mean, look, he's a registered psychologist,
Yeah.
right? And this is public knowledge. Like he's still registered with the college. I don't know what he's doing right now, but he's been told by the Ontario College that he has to go through retraining, he has to go through a period of supervision to ensure that what he is, saying to the public is sound, reasonable, non-discriminatory,
Or
all
aligned
this
with
other
his
stuff.
college, right?
Right,
Like it has
right.
to be aligned with the college. He
Yeah,
could give up his registration with the college.
for
He's got
sure.
more than enough, like he'll be okay without the college,
I'm
right?
sure.
But he's proving a point that he disagrees with the college, and maybe the college will change. But at this point, they're saying you are required to do this. And he's fought this in court, right? Like
Yep,
he's taken this, he's appealed it.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. But this is the final decision, right? The college is coming back and saying, look, you can't be spouting what you're spouting out there. That's not aligned with, our ethics and our standards of practice. And so you have to go through retraining. And he's agreed to go through. Oh, well, from what I understand, according to college documents, is that he has agreed to do it. I don't know who's supervising this, but you know, when things get spewed out there that people get alarmed with and it doesn't align with perhaps a certain group, and he's combative about it, this is where it goes, right? And so, part of our profession, at least on paper, states that you have to abide by a certain code of ethics.
Yeah. And you know what? This just, I didn't even think we'd go here, but like forcing people to do training in cultural sensitivity or cross-cultural, like this stuff, you can force people, you can get whole organizations and governments, and but does that really make a difference? I mean, unless you're really open to learning and to taking in that information and even considering it, I'm
Yeah.
not sure that, it's really going to make a difference, but it's the best that we kind of have right now at times. It's like if you refuse to do that, then that automatically excludes you. So, but if you agree to do it unwillingly or like begrudgingly, like you kind of do it and you pass the course and you write the exam and the
Yeah.
information, but really your own values and beliefs don't really change at all. And again, we're all entitled to our own values and beliefs, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's like, can you teach empathy, right? Like,
Well, and we could be even more specific about even some of like Jordan Peterson's disagreements. I don't think we're going to go down that path, but one of the ways for myself that I've made sense of this as I've learned about it, I come from my own cultural background, and we could probably spend a bit of time also like situating ourselves. And
Hmm.
but I'm going to disclose some of my own biases right now. Is that, a couple things that I hold really true is that, like, we don't choose the family that we're born into. We don't choose the part of the world that we're born into.
Right.
We don't choose the postal code that we're born into. And so we know there's research around social determinants of health where we can basically plot postal codes and look at lifespan within those postal
Yep.
codes. So just the effect it has on our physical health, right?
Yep.
So there's inequity, there's differences inherent in our communities.
Yeah.
So we don't choose that. That's one of them that I just like whoever I'm meeting with, they didn't choose for a lot of their life. They did not choose their cultural background. They did not choose their skin color. They did not. These are things that we don't have choice over. Where the arguments will happen is that, people say, well, you can choose these things, or these are our
Yeah.
choices, right? So when it comes to like sexual orientation or gender, there's where we're going into, well, is this a choice or not? And I know that I didn't choose my sexual orientation. I know that like that was
Yeah.
not something that I, figured out and then make it a choice about. It was like pretty hardwired. So
Yep.
that again is like my belief when I'm meeting with people is that you don't choose these things. You might choose whether you tell people about them or not, but you don't actually choose a lot of these things. So
And I think I want to add this piece about children, right? Like you're not born into this culture, like you don't get to choose, right? Like you said. But I see so much of it in the work that I do that there's a great influence in terms of where we do grow up and the family that we do grow up in or the school that we go to or the geographic region where we go to school, right? There's a lot of culture that becomes influential. This is why, and it happens at an early age, but more of it comes to the surface as children get older. It's amazing. I always tell parents, like, for the most part, you go into a classroom between junior kindergarten. Here it's junior kindergarten. Now I know in Alberta it's just kindergarten. And until about grade 2 or 3, most children are still very, very kind to each other and to guests and people who may visit the classroom. When I went for observations, sometimes out of the blue, a child will just come up and hug my leg out of nowhere. It's like, oh, this is different. But then you head into some of the older grades, grade 4, starting around grade 4, grade 5, and so on. You really do start to see how much culture, whether it's the family influence, the school's influence, friendships, how much of that influences a person's upbringing. And they take that with them year after year. Does that mean that it is now ingrained? Not necessarily. I believe that people can still change depending on their foundation, but sometimes it does become start to get very hardwired. I will have parents, for example, tell me like, we don't talk about or we're not racist, we don't discriminate, but somehow my child in grade 8 has been influenced by YouTube videos of like right-wing agenda stuff. And they're talking about, how this particular population is bad. And they're like we don't talk about that stuff at home. It's not something that we are a part of, but my child's being influenced by that stuff.
yeah, I think, look at junior high. People are gravitating to fit in, right? And there's going to be different groups that will form. There could be the jocks, and then there's a whole bunch of different groupings and
Yeah.
subcultures that are getting formed. Even like gangs and joining gangs, right? Like a lot of the research around that is this like desire to feel included and connected, and so we all have this inherent kind of desire to fit in, right? Or to be a part of something, whether that's our family, whether that's other groups. So knowing that, right? But then the stronger the disparity between those groups. So this is again one of my personal beliefs is that as a human species, as a overall humanity, the more disparity, the more difference there is, even in just like financial like wealth, the worse off we will be. the closer everyone is together, there's still going to be differences, but the less differences, the better. And so the sports fans out there that at least follow hockey, this is the rationale behind having the worst team in the league getting the first draft pick, right? And you'll see teams at the end of the year, if they're close to the bottom, they might intentionally kind of lose some games because they want that first draft pick, right? And some people would say, well, that's not fair. Like the teams that are better should, maybe get the first round draft pick. Those that work harder should get the first round draft pick, right? But the league knows that the more parity there is, the more that the teams are closer together in terms of skill and strength, the better the league overall is going to be,
There's
right?
competition,
Yeah,
right?
there's
Yeah.
healthy competition, right? So even the fact that, there's a salary cap, right? So even if you have a lot of money, you can't just go and buy all the best players, right? Because that's not going to be good for the league. That'll be good for
Yeah.
your team. So we're always balancing like what's good for the individual and then what's good for the collective. And how do we make those rules, or how do we navigate this space, whether it's in government or sports, leagues or schools, right?
Yeah. So much of it comes back to sports. Right. I think sports really is a microcosm of culture, the bigger picture. The other thing with sports is like we were talking about this before, when that competitiveness and that aggression comes out in people, like it just you get on a baseball diamond or you get into a hockey arena and like parents become different, coaches become different, and then they step away from that environment and they're like the most mild-mannered people. But when they're there, it's like talk about a collectivist thinking, right? Everybody is more competitive, everybody wants to win, and it just becomes different. That culture for that moment in time. Yeah.
Yeah, when you said win, I was just like, yeah, in sports there's winners and losers, right? There's clear distinctions. And so that scarcity, there's only going to be one winner, right? All of a sudden, you get to see that part of like our human nature, right? And but you were, I didn't even think about this, but on my way, I was on my way to men's group last night and I was listening to the radio and they were interviewing someone at the Oilers game. It was South Asian night for the Edmonton Oilers. And so they have a night, a game, and they have like clothing or like jerseys and stuff like attributed to the South Asian kind of community, right?
Yep.
And they were interviewing an NHL player that is no longer in the NHL anymore, and a coach, and they were talking about like how they're trying to build inclusivity and bring in, South Asian children into the game of hockey, right? And
Yep.
again, other people might say, well, that's, we shouldn't be doing that. Like, why are we spending, why are we devoting like even this airtime to this thing? It's this idea that like we will be better off if we all feel like we can participate in the things around us. And for a
Yep.
lot of immigrants, they come to a new country and they don't feel like they can participate or that they actually have a place in some of these things, right? So,
Yeah. Yep.
yeah.
Or sometimes at the rink, because my kids play hockey and they figure skate, and even we had to learn what this figure skating world is all about because we didn't grow up figure skating. You know, I can skate, but I'm not the greatest skater. Like my parents didn't know any of that stuff, right? So I didn't have the opportunity. Or they just saw hockey and they saw like aggression. It's like why do you want to play a game where you get hit and you get concussions? It doesn't make sense, right? Whereas you talk to somebody whose generations have lived in Canada, they'll be like, that's what we do, right? That's what we do. And so now it's like learning about hockey, organized hockey anyway, and organized figure skating and what is it all about. And for us, that's been a learning curve. And I would like to think that my wife and I, we grew up here, but we didn't have the opportunity to learn about it at the time. So now we're learning about it now.
Yeah, and I would add that like not only it's like that's what we do, it's like that is the best sport. Like hockey in Canada is the best sport. So, if you're in school and you're on the hockey team and you're the captain of the hockey team, like that comes with a lot of status, a lot of like value that if you were the captain of the cricket team in
Yeah.
Canada, you don't get it. So again, it comes back to these like how we value certain things in cultures and then how
Hmm.
that creates like in groups and out groups,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty awesome that the Oilers were having a South Asian night.
Yeah. And they've had like various other like this is and this wasn't here years ago. And so being able to facilitate again more inclusion is at least from my perspective good for the game, it's good for the world, it's good for communities.
Yeah.
Others will disagree. Yeah.
And why not give kids the opportunity, right? Like they don't know what they're missing out on. And if we're so exclusionary, it's not even the children's choice to not play a certain sport, right? It becomes these adults with certain agendas that are gatekeeping. And to me that's, again, it's not right.
Yeah, and the postal code you're born into, the
Yep.
family that you're born into, right? And so actually one of the things that they talked about was like having a program where kids could sign up and get equipment. And
Yep.
because, just affording the equipment or the entry
Yep.
fee is a huge barrier for a lot of people,
Yep.
regardless of their athletic ability, right? So
Yep.
reducing those barriers will allow more people to play the game, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Dave, how do we bring this back into the therapy realm?
Well, I'm almost thinking we should take a break.
No, this is, you know what? I really enjoyed this broad-based discussion though, right? Like I
Mhm.
think if you're really actively listening to us, I think you know where our stances are. And this is probably why we work together, right? Like if we had such different opinions. I mean, some would say, oh, from a marketing perspective, hey, having different opinions, yeah, hey, you get more listeners and like you exponentially grow. But that's not what we do. Like we do this for fun and we get along. And so we have this podcast.
Well, and we come from different cultural backgrounds, right?
Yep.
But we have also some pretty common values. And, it's not hard for me to, yeah, to get behind diversity, inclusion, equity, like those things that some people are saying, oh, like that's just the politically correct thing. We have to do that now because this is the policy. And like, yeah, I don't it actually aligns with my values. So
Yeah.
I'm throwing that out there and I understand that, people have different values but we I think we kind of connect on that level.
Like I hope that, people go into this profession or any helping profession because they want to help the greater good, right? And I do truly believe that the majority of people do, whether you are a physician, a nurse, psychologist, social worker, whoever, you go into this profession because you want to help people irrespective of where they come from.
What about those bad people that are coming in and changing things for the worse and making things so bad?
Well, that's why I say the majority of us, like the majority of us, like I sometimes say this, I can't remember the context of this, but I've said this multiple times to whether it's a client or friends or whatever. Every profession has a different egg in it. Right?
Well, and I would be a bit like facetious because the example that was popping up in my head, then this is way back, but this is like the RCMP, our federal kind of policing service that's in rural communities throughout Canada. There was, a request or some kind of like there was a big change about like being able to wear a turban, right? With the colors of the
Right,
RCMP, like to
right.
match the uniform and also have like the badge on the front of it, right? Like, so is that okay? Right. But there was a lot of communication or a lot of like rhetoric or discussion around like, well, if they want to work here in Canada in our place at our job, they need to wear our uniform, right? That we're not going to change things. And so is it someone really bad coming in making bad changes to our things? Or can we be like, well, the hat they wear doesn't affect the way they do their job.
Yeah,
And, like, what's the big deal? What is
yeah.
the harm in like changing things? that doesn't really, yeah.
And
Anyways,
maybe this is just the way I think about things, right? And it's maybe my personality, maybe a little bit more laid back. But look, if the objective is to do good work and that is your priority and your duty and your role, why are we even arguing about headdress? It's not like they're saying they don't want to wear any headdress or anything that's representative of the RCMP. They're still going to wear the colors and they'll still, it's still part of the uniform. Like, what's it to anyone else? Like at the end of the day, we just want somebody. I would want someone who does a good job.
yeah. But I think we're hardwired to get stressed about change, and especially change we haven't signed up for, right? So it's more comfortable to say they should just, follow the rules, or they should just do what everyone else is doing, right? If they want to play our sport, if they want to play this, then they need to, figure it out, blend in, right? Like assimilate. That's more comfortable for the dominant culture, or the dominant kind of like
Yeah.
narrative. Yeah.
And my counterpoint to that would be like, well, they should just be more flexible in their thinking and be a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah, again, so what is the harm, right? Like
Yeah.
what is the harm with having like rainbow hockey tape on a stick, right? They're really, it's hockey tape is hockey tape. The color changes, but the league came in and said no more of that, right? We're not going to do that anymore. And so you're going to see back and forth. At what level do people have flexibility and freedom to express themselves, and what level do they have to fit in, right?
Well, look what happened to Colin Kaepernick, right? For those who
Hmm.
don't know, a football player,
Yeah.
a very good football player, but stuff happened and I won't get into it here, but like his career was pretty much over. And I believe the league made it a point to end his career.
Hmm.
That's just my opinion. But to your point, Dave, I think there's maybe a good part to take a break, and then we'll narrow it down after this to
We'll try,
more so to the therapy setting. But I do think this is a good foundation. Like where we're coming from and what culture is all about.
at least from our perspective.
All right, take good care, everyone.
Take care, Andrew.